This is United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast, a platform that unites global voices in a call to action to protect our planet's rich biodiversity. Join us for critical insights and let's stand united for biodiversity.
Welcome to this week's episode of United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast. I am your host, Kiana Wilberg. We are just mere hours away from a landmark event, the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit. To help us unpack the objectives, the vision, and some of the star power that we will have at the helm of these discussions is a very distinguished guest, Ms. Pradeepa Bholanauth, environmental economist and Senior Director for Climate and REDD Plus at the Ministry of Natural Resources. Pradeepa, welcome to the podcast.
Kiana, thank you very much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to speak about the Global Biodiversity Alliance and the upcoming summit tomorrow.
Yes, indeed. It's exciting times because this marks a new chapter in Guyana's green leadership. But this Global Biodiversity Alliance, how did it all come about?
So, as we cast our minds back to the Guyana story and the work we started on environment several decades ago, my mind goes back to 2009 when we launched our first low carbon development strategy. Mm-hmm. And that strategy sought to make the point not just for Guyanese and for our region, but for the world at large, that economic advancement and environmental protection indeed can go hand in hand. And since 2009, Guyana has been at the forefront of making that case and of proving that case, that indeed the economy can advance in a sustainable manner and we can protect the environment and even advance key pillars of conservation as part of that development. Fast forward to our second phase of the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, that takes our vision to 2030. We've expanded the LCDS to focus on biodiversity as well as water management. And as part of this work, the Biodiversity Alliance and the global perspective on biodiversity are central to the theme of the LCDS and therefore the continuing work that we are doing in a leadership manner at the global stage.
Wow, that is really thought-provoking because the Guyana story, as you said, didn't start today. We have a track record of showing that this leadership has become part and central of our identity, so to speak. And this Global Biodiversity Alliance, there's a summit to mark this. Tell us about the objectives of the summit tomorrow.
Thanks, Kiana. The objectives of the summit are really centered on the pillars of creating a global framework for advancing an alliance towards biodiversity financing and fulfilling in a scaled-up manner the provision of financing to resource biodiversity conservation globally, creating a framework for global monitoring of biodiversity and biodiversity targets, and scaling efforts at the community level that will assist in biodiversity conservation. The intention is to bring together stakeholders from all spheres of society, from the governmental level, from the private sector, from civil society level, and from non-governmental organizations, as we work together to not only identify what the problems are, but importantly, what the solutions could be.
I love that point, and I don't want it to be lost in our audience, so I want to repeat it again. You spoke about biodiversity conservation, biodiversity financing, and global advocacy. Now, you said those are the three main pillars of this alliance. Tell us a bit more about how this is expected to be operationalized and why they are so important to the global movement.
Thanks, Kiana. So as we look back to the starting days as to what really identified those three main objectives, we look towards President Ali's speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September of last year, when he made the compelling point that we cannot address the climate crisis without addressing biodiversity loss. they're really two sides of the same coin. So, as we look at addressing the climate crisis and playing our role, not just within Guyana or within the Amazon or within South areas of the world, we have to look at climate crisis and biodiversity loss together. And as we seek the solutions to the climate crisis, we have to also look at what needs to be done to address the loss in biodiversity. And what are the facts facing our world today? What is the nature of the crisis? The crisis embodies many facts, but among those are the fact that we are losing 10 million hectares of forests globally every year. And that is repeated on an annual basis. The fact remains as well at a global scale that over 1 million species are at the risk of extinction, and not within the next centuries, but within the next decade.
Wow.
And then we're also at the risk of seeing what is already the case of 85% of our wetlands having been lost, and that number being exacerbated and worsened as the years progress. So that is the nature of the crisis. And it's a crisis that needed action not just today, but needed action 10, 20, 30 years ago. So the time to act is now. And those actions must center on the three main pillars, as you mentioned. We need to find a way to move the dial on biodiversity financing. We cannot just keep talking about the nature of the crisis and to extemporize on what the nature of the problem is. That problem will remain a problem unless we resource governments, we resource regional administration, and most importantly, resource forest-based communities with what they need to conserve the biodiversity that they are protecting. And those actions do not only need resourcing for 1 or 2 or 3 years. This resourcing must be continuous and must be predictable and must have the longevity to finance large-scale long-term action. In terms of the second objective, we see a lot of momentum at the level of the global stage in speaking about what needs to be done by governments to address biodiversity loss. And that is very essential. That is vital. But that alone is not the solution. We need to join hands with the private sector, where a lot of this financing could potentially come from, to finance biodiversity action and biodiversity conservation. We need to work in a more integrated way with local people and indigenous communities, communities that are really the stewards of many of the forest areas that are intact on the earth today. And we also need to importantly work with research organizations and think tanks that have spent a lot of time creating and reaching solutions on what would be the best options for biodiversity conservation and how to pursue these options. And bringing this all together in a central spot so that no longer are we having these conversations in silos. The researchers speaking together, the private sector speaking together, governments speaking together, non-governmental organizations speaking together. Those conversations will be quite rich, but never reaching the solutions that we seek at the scale that we seek them and at the level of financing that we need to come towards the actions that need to be financed. And this is the point that President Ali made at the United Nations General Assembly last year, that unless we come together and create a global framework under the auspices of the Convention on Biological Diversity and advancing work under the Global Biodiversity Framework, bringing all stakeholders together, looking at the crisis and at the same time the solutions, we will be able to get the best outcome if we undertake this approach. And it really was a very bold move that he announced Guyana's willingness to take the lead role in moving this forward. And that is what will be happening tomorrow at the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit, the inaugural summit of the Alliance, led by President Ali.
Thank you, Pradeepa. And the summit is spread across mainly 2 days, and then there's a third day, but before I even interject on that, I want to give you the floor to tell us a bit about what is the framework that will be guiding the discussions over those 2 to 3 days.
Over the first day, which will be tomorrow, on Wednesday, we will be looking and examining the nature of the crisis.
Okay.
What is it that confronts us in terms of the various aspects of biodiversity loss?
Okay.
What is it that we have to confront? And what is the scale of action that would be needed to address those? So the first day of the summit will be an introspective look at what has been happening globally. What is happening to forest loss? What is happening to the extinction of species? What is happening to wetlands? What is happening to our ocean space, as well as to deserts and all biomes that house biodiversity, rich biodiversity, that life on planet Earth really depend on for survival. So the first day we'll take a look at the nature of the crisis and what is it we have to think about as we frame the solutions. The second day of the summit will be the solution framing day. We will be looking at what financing options are currently available and how these could be leveraged to communities, to regional administrations, to governments to help to finance these initiatives. We will also be speaking with research organizations, looking and examining scientific solutions that have already been developed that can help us monitor and keep in a transparent and an accountable manner an eye on global indices. The Global Biodiversity Alliance proposes the establishment of a global biodiversity index that is going to, as we propose it to be, the level at which we monitor how well or not well we continue to do as global efforts consolidate around this objective. And the second day will frame a lot of the solutions on biodiversity conservation. We will be hearing from over those 2 days from research organizations and high-level universities, including Oxford University, Yale University. We will be speaking to folks from the Field Museum and other research organizations. We have very compelling forces, for example, the Campaign for Nature, who will be in Guyana, and Senator Russ Feingold and his leadership through the Campaign for Nature in taking the work on biodiversity conservation forward, Conservation International, the World Wildlife Fund, major development partners, including financing institutions like the World Bank, the IDB, will also be here. And we have key government officials whom have been quite vocal in the conversation on biodiversity. And over the course of those 2 days, we will take a very careful look at what has been done and what needs to be done that have the greatest urgency. And coming out of those 2 days will be a work plan, an action plan that will identify the leadership of key partners in taking that work forward. And the ultimate objective of this inaugural summit will be to take the outcomes to the upcoming meeting of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP30 meeting, which is planned for Belém in November of this year. And we are fortunate to have in attendance at the meeting, at the summit that will take place tomorrow, the participation of the president of the COP30 Secretariat. And that really is an exciting linkage for us because it will ensure that what takes place tomorrow and what takes place on Thursday will then be advanced to the COP30 discussions to further ramp up and accelerate decisions and commitments and political and global advocacy in really addressing biodiversity loss as an integral part of addressing the climate crisis.
Thanks, Pradeepa. And I want to close on a bit of a personal note. Pradeepa, you're one of the individuals who has been close to the heartbeat of Guyana's green leadership. What does this moment mean for you?
Kiana, thanks for asking me that question. This is a very compelling moment for me because it really brings to the fore what would have been several decades of work, not just by Guyana, but work that would have started several decades ago from as early as President Jagdeo, now Vice President Jagdeo's leadership in framing the first low-carbon development strategy, the first LCDS of its kind from a developing country. And watching that process, watching Dr. Jack Dio develop that out, not just into a concept, but into an operational framework, and then seeing that lead to our second low carbon development strategy under the stewardship of President Ali, really brings it full circle, not just in taking action and an idea to full scale implementation, but it really shows, and it's a privilege to have been part of this, it really shows how small countries could make a huge difference once there is political will, strong political leadership, and clear and strategic insights into what needs to be done to address the environmental crisis. And that we see in the vision of President Ali and what will happen over the next 2 days.
Pradeepa, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to give us some insight into what we can expect. And I know that this is truly going to be a remarkable event for Guyana and for our history as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Kiana. It's been a pleasure.
To our audience, thank you as well for joining us. We will bring you more insights regarding the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit in due time. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast. Be sure to follow us for more insightful episodes on our Spotify, LinkedIn, and Facebook accounts.